The Call of the Early Dawn. The wooden floorboards creaked softly under Liam's feet as he moved through the dark house. It was 4 a.m, a time when the rest of the world remained fast asleep. The air inside the cabin was cold, smelling faintly of pine needles and wood smoke. Liam pulled his thick woolen sweater tight around his chest, his hands trembling slightly from a mix of cold and intense anticipation. Today was the day his grandfather, whom he called Data, had promised to take him into the deep ridges of the valley. He found Data in the kitchen, sitting under the dim glow of a single overhead bulb. The old man was already dressed in his faded canvas hunting jacket, his weathered hands wrapping a thermos of hot black coffee. On the wooden table sat 2 leather packs and a cleaning kit. Data looked up, his gray eyes crinkling at the corners with a quiet, knowing smile. He did not say good morning out loud. Silence was the first lesson of the woods. He merely nodded toward a plate of thick-cut bread and honey, gesturing for Liam to eat and fuel his body for the long miles ahead. Liam chewed quickly, his eyes darting to the corner of the room where Dita's old bolt-action rifle rested inside its padded sleeve. The weapon felt like a mythical object to Liam, something earned through decades of patience and survival. For years, Liam had watched his grandfather walk into the mist alone, returning with stories and sustenance. Now, at 12 years old, Liam was finally deemed ready to step into those footprints. As they stepped out onto the porch, the crisp autumn air hit Liam's face like a splash of ice water. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, with the first hint of gold bleeding through the eastern horizon. Dita handed Liam a lightweight canvas pack, checking the straps to ensure they were snug against the boy's shoulders. "The mountain demands respect, Liam," Data whispered, his voice deep and gravelly like river gravel. "Walk softly, breathe slowly, and listen to what the trees are trying to tell you." The echoes in the whispering woods, the tree line swallowed them completely within 20 minutes of leaving the cabin. The transition from the open meadow to the dense forest felt like stepping into a vast, living cathedral. Towering pines and ancient oaks stretched high above, their canopy filtering the early morning light into long, dusty beams of silver. The ground beneath their boots was a thick carpet of damp moss and decaying leaves, muffling their footsteps to a faint, rhythmic crunch. Liam stayed exactly 3 paces behind his grandfather, mimicking the old man's deliberate stride. Dita walked with a strange, fluid grace, despite his advanced age and stiff knees. He placed his heel down first, rolling his weight onto the toe to avoid snapping any dry twigs. Liam tried his best to copy the movement, but every few minutes, a loud crack would echo through the silence. Each time, Dita would pause, tilt his head slightly, and wait for the forest to settle before moving forward again. The forest was far from silent. It was filled with a language Liam did not yet understand. High above, a blue jay shrieked a warning to its neighbors, its sharp cry cutting through the damp air. A squirrel scurried up the rough bark of a hickory tree, dropping a shower of loose husks. Data stopped by a massive rotting log covered in bright green shelf fungi. He pointed a thick finger toward a soft patch of mud at the base of the wood. Liam leaned closer, his eyes widening. Impressed deep into the earth was a sharp, 2-toed indentation. The edges were clean and crisp, not yet ruined by the morning dew. "White-tailed deer," Data murmured, kneeling down so his knees popped. "A buck, judging by the depth of the heel and the width of the stride. He passed through here less than an hour ago, heading up toward the high ridge to feed." We are on his path now. The weight of the steel. They rested at the base of a jagged rock outcrop that overlooked a wide, mist-covered ravine. The sun had finally climbed above the peaks, burning off the heavy fog and revealing the vibrant orange and red colors of the valley below. Data unbuckled his pack and carefully pulled the rifle from its protective sleeve. The blued steel of the barrel caught the morning sun, gleaming with a dull, serious light. Data didn't hand the gun to Liam right away. Instead, he laid it across his own lap, his fingers running along the smooth walnut stock. A rifle is not a toy, nor is it a symbol of power, Data said, his voice completely devoid of his usual warmth. It is a heavy responsibility. It has the power to take life, to sustain our own. If you do not treat it with absolute caution, it will bring nothing but tragedy. Liam nodded solemnly, swallowing hard. The theoretical safety rules he had memorized at the kitchen table suddenly felt incredibly real. Data opened the bolt, showing Liam the empty, gleaming chamber. He then demonstrated how to check the safety mechanism twice, how to properly align the iron sights, and how to hold the heavy stock firmly against the pocket of his shoulder to absorb the upcoming recoil. When Data finally placed the rifle into Liam's hands, the boy was surprised by its sheer weight. His arms trembled slightly as he brought the cold steel up, aiming at a dead stump 50 paces away. The front sight post danced unsteadily against the wood. Breathe out halfway, hold it, and squeeze the trigger gently, Data instructed softly from behind his shoulder. Don't jerk it. Let the shot surprise you. Liam practiced the dry fire, hearing the sharp click of the firing pin against an empty chamber, feeling the heavy reality of the hunt settle into his bones. Reading the hidden signs. As the morning progressed, the temperature rose, turning the crisp air into a comfortable warmth. They climbed higher up the ridge, leaving the damp lowlands behind. Data began testing Liam's observation skills, stopping periodically to ask him what he saw. At first, Liam saw nothing but endless trees and gray stones. But slowly, under his grandfather's patient guidance, the invisible details of the forest began to stand out. Data stopped next to a young sapling whose bark had been violently shredded from about 3 feet off the ground down to its roots. The pale inner wood of the tree was exposed, oozing sticky white sap.
"What happened here, Liam?" Data asked, leaning against his walking stick. Liam studied the damage, remembering the stories his father used to tell. "A buck," Liam said, tentatively. "He was scraping the velvet off his antlers against the bark." Data nodded approvingly, a flash of pride crossing his features. A few 100 yards later, they found a bedding spot where the tall orchard grass had been pressed flat in 2 large oval shapes. Data knelt down and pressed his palm flat against the flattened grass.
"Cold," he remarked. "They slept here during the night and moved out at the first light of dawn. They are moving ahead of us, using the wind to scent anything following them. We must change our direction to keep the breeze in our faces." Liam wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, realizing that hunting was not about luck or running blindly through the woods. It was a complex game of chess played against an opponent who knew the board perfectly. Every broken leaf, every scraped tree, and every shifted stone was a clue left behind. To be a successful hunter, Liam had to learn to read the forest like a book. The test of the silent stream. By midday, their path was blocked by a fast-moving mountain stream that cut through a rocky gorge. The water was crystal clear, rushing violently over smooth, dark stones and creating pools of white foam. To continue their hunt on the high ridge where the deer fed, they had to cross the water without making a sound that could alert wildlife for miles around. The only way across was a natural bridge formed by a fallen birch tree. The trunk was narrow, slick with wet moss, and suspended 5 feet above the rushing, icy current. Data went first, his boots finding traction on the bark with impossible ease. He moved without hesitation, keeping his center of gravity low and his arms extended slightly for balance. When he reached the opposite bank, he turned and looked back at Liam, his expression serious.
Liam's heart hammered against his ribs as he stepped onto the log. The wood felt incredibly narrow beneath his boots, and the sound of the rushing water below filled his ears, making him dizzy. His foot slipped slightly on a patch of wet moss, and his arms flailed wildly as he fought to regain his balance. He froze, terrified of falling into the freezing stream and ruining the dry gear in his pack.
"Don't look down at the water, Liam!" Data called out over the roar of the stream, his voice calm but firm.
Look at me. Look at the end of the log. Your feet will go where your eyes are looking. Liam took a deep breath, tearing his gaze away from the rushing water and focusing entirely on his grandfather's steady hand. He took one step, then another, focusing on his balance until his boots finally touched the solid earth of the far bank.
The long, waiting shadows reached the high ridge by early afternoon, finding a natural blind nestled within a thick cluster of juniper bushes. The position was perfect. It overlooked a wide alpine meadow where wild clover grew in abundance. This was a place where deer frequently came to feed during the late afternoon before the sun set. Detta settled onto a foam cushion, clearing away the dry twigs beneath his seat to prevent any accidental noise. "Now comes the hardest part of the hunt," Detta whispered, checking the wind direction by dropping a pinch of dry dust from his fingertips. The waiting. A hunter must learn to become a stone. If you move, if you fidget, if you get impatient, the forest will know you are here long before you see anything. Hours passed in absolute stillness. Liam's legs grew stiff, and a sharp cramp began to form in his left calf. Ants crawled across his boots, and a small beetle landed on his sleeve, but he forced himself to remain completely motionless. The sun moved slowly across the sky, casting long, dramatic shadows across the open meadow. The bright midday colors faded into the soft, golden tones of the late afternoon. Liam found his mind wandering, but he kept pulling his focus back to the edge of the tree line. He began to notice the subtle rhythms of the meadow. He watched how the grass swayed in response to the wind, and how the birds only landed when they felt completely safe. Through the long hours of absolute silence, Liam realized that he was no longer just an observer looking into the woods. He was becoming a part of the landscape itself. The sudden ghost. The sun was hanging low over the western peaks, painting the clouds in shades of brilliant crimson and gold, when the meadow changed. The birds in the lower branches suddenly stopped their singing, and an intense silence fell over the grass. Data shifted his posture by a fraction of an inch, his hand gently touching Liam's shoulder. The touch was light, but it instantly brought Liam to full alert. From the dark edge of the pine forest, a shape materialized. It did not walk into the meadow. It simply appeared, like a ghost stepping out of a dark curtain. It was a magnificent white-tailed buck. His coat was a deep, healthy gray-brown, and his neck was thick and powerful. Atop his head sat a towering crown of 10-point antlers, the polished tips gleaming like ivory in the fading sunlight. The buck stepped forward, stopping at the edge of the high grass. His ears twitched back and forth, catching the distant sounds of the valley, and his black nose tasted the cool air for any sign of danger. Liam felt his heart leap into his throat, hammering so violently he was certain the deer would hear it. His breath came in short, jagged gasps, a wave of adrenaline rushing through his veins. "Steady, boy," Data whispered, his voice barely a breath against the wind. "That is buck fever. Do not let it control you. Breathe through your nose, slow your heart down, and remember your training." Liam closed his eyes for a single second, forcing the air deep into his lungs, fighting to calm his shaking hands as he prepared to raise the heavy rifle. The moment of truth. With slow, microscopic movements, Liam brought the heavy wooden stock of the rifle up to his shoulder. The cold steel felt familiar now, a natural extension of his arm. He leaned his cheek against the smooth walnut wood, aligning the front sight post with the rear notch. Through the iron sights, the great buck looked impossibly large, dominating his entire field of view. The deer stepped further into the open meadow, turning its body sideways to offer a clean, ethical profile. Liam shifted his aim, placing the front sight post just behind the buck's front shoulder, right where his grandfather had taught him the vital organs rested. His finger found the cold curve of the metal trigger, the pressure of his skin resting lightly against the mechanism. The world seemed to slow down to a crawl. The wind died completely, and the rustling grass went perfectly still. Liam looked at the magnificent animal, feeling a profound sense of awe, mixed with a sharp pang of hesitation. This creature was alive, breathing the same mountain air, completely unaware of the danger hiding in the bushes. To pull the trigger meant ending that beautiful life forever. "Only take the shot if you are absolutely certain, Liam," Dita's quiet voice echoed in his ear, offering comfort without any pressure. "An ethical hunter never doubts." Liam took a deep, final breath, exhaling half of it until his chest was perfectly still. He focused all his energy into his index finger, applying a steady, smooth pressure to the trigger, waiting for the sudden surprise of the shot. The thunderous crack. The rifle exploded with a deafening roar that tore through the silence of the valley. The heavy recoil slammed the wooden stock hard into Liam's shoulder, pushing him back several inches against the dirt. A bright flash of orange fire illuminated the gathering darkness for a fraction of a second, followed immediately by a thick cloud of gray gunpowder smoke that smelled sharply of sulfur. Liam blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision through the drifting smoke. The blast had startled a flock of crows from the nearby trees, their chaotic cawing filling the air as they circled high above. For a moment, Liam lost sight of the meadow, his heart racing as he worked the bolt-action mechanism, ejecting the spent brass casing with a sharp metallic ping. When the smoke finally cleared, the meadow was empty. The magnificent 10-point buck was gone, leaving nothing behind but the swaying stems of tall grass where it had stood just moments before. Liam's stomach dropped into a cold, heavy knot of disappointment and fear. He looked at his grandfather, his eyes wide with worry. Did I miss Data? Did I just wound him? Data did not look upset. He stood up slowly from his cushion, dusting the dry leaves from his trousers. He looked out toward the edge of the woods where the deer had run, his eyes scanning the ground carefully. "We do not know yet, Liam," the old man said calmly. "We never run blindly after a shot. We sit, we give the animal time to settle, and then we go look for the true story written in the dirt." Following the trail, they waited 30 long minutes as the twilight deep blue deepened into the dark shades of night. Data then pulled 2 heavy metal flashlights from his pack, handing one to Liam. The beams of white light cut through the darkness, illuminating millions of dancing dust motes and the thick dew that was beginning to form on the grass. They walked out to the exact spot where the buck had been standing when Liam fired. Data knelt down, sweeping his light slowly across the ground. "Look closely, Liam," he instructed. Liam bent over, his eyes scanning the green clover. He spotted a collection of disturbed earth where the deer's hooves had dug deep into the mud as it bolted, indicating a fast, panicked escape. A few feet away, Liam's flashlight beam caught a dark, crimson glistening on a broad leaf. He dropped to his knees, his heart pounding. It was blood, bright red and filled with tiny bubbles. Data joined him, touching the fluid with his finger. "Good, clean lung blood," Data pronounced quietly. "Your aim was true, Liam. The shot was ethical and quick. He won't have gone very far." They began tracking the trail into the thick woods, moving slowly from one crimson drop to the next. The process required intense focus. Sometimes the sign was a large splash on a log, and other times it was just a tiny speck on the underside of a fern. Liam led the way, his flashlight tracing the path of the deer through the dark, unfamiliar shadows of the night forest. Image generation prompt. A dark night shot of an old man and a boy tracking a trail through the woods using bright flashlights. The flashlight beams are focused on the forest floor, revealing small drops of bright red blood on a green fern leaf. The atmosphere is tense and focused. The sacred meadow. The trail led them through a dense thicket of briars and out into a small, hidden clearing surrounded by ancient hemlock trees. The moon had risen high in the sky, casting a pale silver glow over the scene. There, resting peacefully on a bed of soft moss beneath the branches, lay the great 10-point buck. His long journey through the mountains had come to its natural end. Liam stopped at the edge of the clearing, his flashlight beam trembling slightly as it washed over the animal. Seeing the deer up close, without the distance of the rifle sights, was an incredibly powerful experience. The buck looked even larger in depth, his thick muscles relaxed and his magnificent antlers resting against the dark earth. The forest around them felt completely silent, like a sacred room. Liam approached slowly, kneeling down by the deer's head. He reached out a hand, his fingers burying into the thick, coarse hair of the buck's neck. The coat was still warm, but the spark of life had gone. A wave of mixed emotions washed over the boy. Triumph at a successful hunt, exhaustion from the long day, and a deep, heavy sadness for the beautiful life that had been taken. Detta walked up behind him, placing a large, comforting hand on Liam's shoulder. He did not offer loud congratulations or cheers. Instead, he knelt down in the moss beside his grandson, removing his hunting cap out of respect. "It is right to feel sad, Liam," Detta said softly. "An honorable hunter never rejoices over death. We thank the animal for its sacrifice, because its life ensures our family will be fed through the harsh winter." The rite of the woods. The emotional moment transitioned into hours of hard, physical labor. Data pulled a sharp, bone-handled hunting knife from his belt and laid it on a clean cloth. "The hunt is only a small part of our duty," Data explained, his expression serious. "Now we must care for the meat. If we waste even a single piece through carelessness, we insult the animal's sacrifice." Under Data's careful direction, Liam helped with the field dressing. The work was difficult, messy, and required precise anatomical knowledge to avoid ruining the meat. Data showed Liam how to make clean, shallow incisions and how to use the knife safely in the dark without slipping. The steam from the warm interior of the animal rose into the freezing night air, filling the clearing with a rich, metallic smell. Liam's hands were covered in dark blood, and his muscles ached from holding the heavy limbs steady, but he did not complain. He felt a deep sense of pride in his work, understanding that this was a traditional skill passed down through generations of survivors. Every cut had a purpose, and every step was performed with the utmost care and cleanliness. When the work was finally complete, they wiped their tools clean and washed their hands with cold water from a nearby spring. The meat was prepared for transport, packed securely to protect it from scavengers. Liam looked down at his blood-stained hands, feeling like he had crossed an invisible line. He was no longer just a boy playing in the woods. He had participated in the ancient cycle of life and death. The heavy journey home was the most physically exhausting task Liam had ever faced. Because the buck was too heavy to carry whole, they had secured the meat into their heavy backpacks. Liam's pack felt 3 times heavier than it had in the morning, the straps digging deep into his sore shoulders and pulling down against his tired lower back. The forest looked completely different at night. The familiar trails were hidden in deep shadow, and the shapes of the trees looked strange and monstrous under the pale moonlight. Every step required immense effort. Liam's legs felt like lead, and his boots slipped frequently on the wet rocks and exposed roots. More than once, he wanted to sit down on a log and rest his aching body, but Data kept moving forward. "The mountain does not care if you are tired, Liam," Data called back, his voice steady despite carrying the heaviest share of the load. "This is where your true character is tested. Anyone can walk when it's easy. A real hunter finds his strength when his body tells him to quit. Keep your eyes on my back and keep moving." Liam gritted his teeth, shifting the heavy pack against his spine. He focused entirely on the rhythmic swing of his grandfather's canvas jacket in front of him. He stopped thinking about the pain in his shoulders or the distance left to walk. He simply focused on placing one foot in front of the other, drawing strength from the old man's endurance, marching steadily through the dark mountain night. The return to the hearth. It was past midnight when they finally broke through the tree line and saw the dark silhouette of the family cabin. A warm, welcoming light shone from the kitchen window, casting a long yellow rectangle across the frost-covered grass of the meadow. The sight of safety gave Liam a sudden burst of energy, his tired legs moving faster as they approached the porch. They dropped their heavy packs onto the wooden porch floor with loud, satisfying thuds. The sound brought Liam's mother and father rushing to the door, their faces filled with anxiety that quickly turned into immense relief and joy when they saw the successful hunters.
His father looked at the heavy packs, then at the blood on Liam's sweater, his eyes shining with immediate understanding and pride.
Inside, the cabin was warm and cozy, the wood stove crackling with a bright, cheerful fire. Liam collapsed onto a wooden chair, his body trembling with exhaustion as he pulled off his heavy, mud-caked boots. His mother handed him a large mug of hot chocolate, the sweet warmth spreading through his frozen fingers and melting the chill that had settled deep into his bones. Detta stood by the door, hanging his canvas coat on its wooden peg. He looked across the warm room at Liam, nodding slowly to the boy's parents. "The boy did well today," Detta said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. He walked like a shadow, listened to the woods, and took a clean, honorable shot. Tonight, he walks into this house as a provider for this family.
The next morning, the sun rose into a clear blue sky, casting a bright light over the valley. Liam sat on the porch steps, watching the thin wisp of smoke rise from the cabin's chimney. His body was incredibly sore, and his shoulder bore a dark purple bruise from the rifle's recoil. But he wore the mark like a medal of honor. On the porch table sat the cleaned, polished antlers of the 10-point buck. Data walked out of the cabin, holding a leather cord and a small piece of the buck's antler that he had carefully carved and drilled through during the early morning hours. He handed the handmade pendant to Liam, who placed the smooth bone necklace around his neck.
"You are a part of these mountains now, Liam," Data said, looking out over the vast ridges they had conquered the day before. "The lessons you learned out there, patience, respect, silence, and endurance, are not just for hunting. They are the values that will guide you through the rest of your life. Never forget the sacrifice of the deer, and never forget who you are." Liam touched the cool bone pendant resting against his chest, looking out at the high ridge where the trees whispered in the morning wind. He felt a deep, permanent change inside himself. He was no longer just a child listening to stories of the mountains. He had earned his place within the ancient cycle, becoming a true guardian of the ridges alongside his grandfather, ready for whatever paths lay ahead.